the battle's going on all day, and we're hearing specifically about 2 or 3 wounded guys, but nobody can get to them. And our call sign was Gecko, and they're like, Gecko, we're wondering if you guys would be willing to give it a try to get in this LZ and get these guys out now that it's dark. And so I'm flying co-pilot to flight lead, and I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll give it a try. So we shut down, we brief it up. We know it's going to be a hot LZ. We know there's fighting going on. And there's this weird movie moment where my flight lead, Tom Cahill, who got the Silver Star that night, unfortunately he's no longer with us. He literally does one of these, hey guys, if we go and do this, there's a really good chance we're all gonna get fucked up. Does anybody have a problem with that, right?
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Yonel Yogi Dorelis, a retired and longtime helicopter pilot who served in the Marine Corps, Navy, Army, and Air Force. While in uniform, Yogi flew a variety of aircraft and mission profiles, but spent a considerable amount of time flying combat search and rescue for the Air Force, including early in the war in Afghanistan. In fact, during this time, Yogi earned a Distinguished Flying Cross with V device for his life-saving efforts in Operation Anaconda. Beyond earning the coveted DFC, Yogi also accumulated 5,500 hours of flight time, approximately 500 of that in combat. He's credited with saving more than 70 military lives and approximately 300 more in his civilian flight career as part of an EMS crew, which he does to this day. It was a blast to sit down with another aviator, and a CSAR one at that. I hope you enjoy this combat story as much as I did. Yogi, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Some people may recognize your accent and your name from the tail end of one of our previous interviews where you shared your story as a guest. And after hearing that and reading a little bit more, wanted to have you back on as a fellow aviator, helicopter pilot, no less, to talk through a lot of the pretty unique experiences you had. And I know that you've said over and over, you had a very undistinguished career, but I think between us, there's one of us who has a DFC and one who does not. So let's start there with a very, what I would call distinguished career. And I would love to just hear more about it. So thank you very much for coming back on and taking the time for this.
Again, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and kind of tell my story and get a chance to BS with you about flying.
Yeah, perfect. And I know we got a lot to cover for your time in uniform, especially one of the very few folks who's been in 4 branches, I think. But let's start out with you as a kid. I know from a pilot's perspective, a lot of kids grow up thinking like, I want to go fly something. And they have this moment in life where they realize they wanted to fly. I'm curious if you had such a moment, and if you did, what was it like?
You know, I don't know if I had that moment. To be honest with you, I've wanted to fly as far back as I can, cognitively remember. My mom has a picture of me. She had a picture of me. I think I was about 3 or 4 in a bathtub, with bubble bath holding an airplane. I mean, again, I've listened to a lot of your guests and listened to some of the other podcasts. A lot of these guys talk about all I ever wanted to be was a Navy SEAL or a Ranger, Green Beret. I knew from an early age I wanted to be a pilot and a military pilot. I can't think of a catalyst. Excuse me. I just was always just fascinated by aviation and flying, and it was just one of those things. And then, and then as I got older, then I got a little more specific about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to fly, all that. But I loved airplanes. I remember when we travel, I used to get so excited about just getting on an airplane, and I'd stand in the airport and watch the airplanes taxi by and take off. And I'd be lying if I said I don't still kind of like to do that now when I'm traveling. And I always wanted the little set of wings from the stewardess. I mean, it's just, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to fly.
And I think for those of us who have been pilots, We might say that there's a bit of a stereotype for the pilot. I feel like a lot of the pilots I knew were pretty detail oriented. Like obviously there's a safety consciousness based on what you do every day and how dangerous it is. Did you notice any of that in yourself when you were younger? If you look back now, after all the time you've flown, was there some of that in you as a kid?
I don't know. I mean, I think back then I was, it was the concept of flying more than the details of it and reading up on it. And, the things you have to deal with when you get to flight school or just in the military in general, as far as attention to detail goes, things like that. I mean, I just knew I wanted to fly. I mean, I was, again, I mentioned a little earlier, like I'm a World War II freak, but by the time I was like 7, I knew all the World War II aircraft and American, Japanese, German, obscure aircraft that no one heard of, with the marvel of social media, I've reconnected with folks who knew me in elementary school. They still remember drawing these epic dogfights in the back of the classroom while everybody else was taking notes. I mean, I just was obsessed with it as a little kid, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And once I started reading, I read everything I could on it, and I wish I could pinpoint a moment, but it was something I always wanted to do. I just can't pinpoint that moment.
And
I don't come from a military family by any means. I mean, my mom's brother served in World War II. That was just like everyone else. They did what they had to do and then came back and had lives. I don't come from a military family. My older brother avoided the Vietnam draft pretty, got a deferment and stuff like that. My mom, typical Jewish mom, she wanted a doctor or a lawyer. But I put that idea to rest pretty early. And I don't know why. It's just I think there's a gene in people. When we've talked, I've heard you talk about it. I just think there's something in certain people that draws you to the military and a military career. I don't know what it is. I mean, I just was something that was always fascinated me. Even when I got older, my mom was dating a guy who used to be a Marine aviator, and he was telling me some stories. And I remember I was like 12. I was like, wait a minute, they pay you for this. You know what I mean? He was just talking about flying around the Western Pacific and libo ports and all this other stuff, and telling me stuff obviously he wasn't going to talk about around my mom. And I was like, wait, they pay you for this kind of stuff. And he was like, yep. And I was like, wait, this seems like a good gig.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. But when I got into it and when I realized what it took, I was not naturally cut out for the military or aviation. So I had to learn. Some guys breeze through it, and I was not. I'm a knucklehead. I had to learn about attention to detail. I'm not a super detail oriented guy like that. So I had to learn and teach myself about that. And like I said, I didn't naturally take to the military when I first got in the Marine Corps. It was a little interesting, initially.
So I want to dig into that. If we go back, you don't have like a moment where you decide like, all right, I want to fly, because you kind of have always remembered that. But since you didn't come from a military family, what was it that made you want to join the military? Was it just that was your opportunity to fly? And as you mentioned, there's
that was part of it. I just thought military flying was the cool kind of flying. I grew up in the era of all the World War II movies. Then as a teenager, and you had Baba Black Sheep, but I will tell you, I can tell you exactly when I got hooked on the Marine Corps, right? So I saw Sands of Iwo Jima, right? And I mean, you probably cannot get more cliche than this, right? So I'm watching Sands of Iwo Jima, and, if you've seen the movie, there's a character in it played by this really famous actor of the time called John Agar. He's a colonel's son. He's just joining the Marine Corps because we're at war, and he just wants to do his thing and be done with it, but he has no interest in it. And he's butting heads with John Wayne the whole movie, while John Wayne's trying to square him away to get him to be a squared away Marine, and now, fast forward to Iwo Jima, the last scene in the movie, They've been fighting on Iwo Jima. Him and John, he's finally squared away, finally gets it. He's a squad leader. And then John Wayne gets killed. And there's the scene at the end. And John Agar gets up. They've all read that letter from John Wayne to his son about be a better man and yada, yada, yada. And then John Agar gets up and he goes, all right, let's get back in the war. And then they start walking down the hill and the smoke and the Marine Corps hymn, hooked. From that moment on, hooked. I was like, I don't know who these motherfuckers are, but I'm going to be one of those guys. And from that point on, I started reading about the Marine Corps. Then I was able to make the nexus that you could be a Marine Corps aviator. And that became my focus, But the problem is I didn't know that you may want to do certain things, but then there's certain other things you probably shouldn't do. And you should conduct your life in a way that's so I straddled growing up. I was not the best kid. And, I could tell you a story.
Yeah. Why don't you give us an example of what that sounds
okay.
like?
So I'm a sophomore in college. I find out how I'm researching how to become a Marine officer. I didn't want to enlist in the Marine Corps. I kind of got focused on this officer thing, but I didn't know, to be an officer, they're actually looking for a type of person, right? So in the Marine Corps, there's this program called a platoon leaders class program, right? Where it's still around today, and it's genius to me because basically they take college kids and they say, we'll send you to OCS in the summer, and then we'll pay you reserve money, but you don't have to do anything while you're in college. You don't have to go to ROTC, you don't have to wear uniforms, you don't have to go drills, but they pay you like E5 reserve money while you're in college. So there's two elements to this story. The first thing is I walk in the officer selection office in New York City. I don't know how to articulate this. I just don't understand that you're required to make a good impression. They're looking for a certain person to be an officer, right? I think I walked in there in a wife beater. You know what I mean? And let's say I was significantly less articulate than I am now. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a Marine officer and blah, blah, blah. And the guy listens to me. He's this major. He's a Mustang, short, squat dude. I remember his name, Bausch, short, squat dude, what you'd expect a Mustang infantry major to look like. Remember, this is 1980, so he'd been to Vietnam. He has some gunnery sergeant standing there who looks like a recruiting poster, bald-headed guy, big dude, same thing, stack of ribbons up to here. And they're looking at me, and basically he said, look, man, you're not the kind of person who becomes an officer. He goes, I don't know what your deal is, but, you're not going to be an officer. I would not recommend you for this program, and he goes, you can enlist in a Marine Corps, which I suggest, get your act together and then look at it. Or he goes, come back in a year, learn how to interview, learn how to dress. He didn't tell me how to do any of this stuff. He just said, come back in a year. He goes, because I'm not going to recommend you now for any of the classes upcoming. He goes, come back in a year, but learn how to interview, show up here properly dressed, make an appointment, give me a call. He gave me his card. But you're out. Now I was pretty crestfallen, but with a lot of things that we think is the end of the world at the time, is probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I took it to heart, because I couldn't believe they didn't want me to be a Marine officer. I was like, what's wrong with these maniacs? And I learned how to, I learned all about basically making a good impression, and I learned that I had to learn, I had to be a little more articulate, and I couldn't talk like I was hanging out on the corner all the time. And I had to, try to, improve my vocabulary and be a little more articulate, and how to dress to make a good impression, and the things you needed to do to make a good impression, and how to interview properly, and all that stuff. And I really spent the next year learning that stuff. And this is before the internet. So I had to ask questions of people, read books in the library, read all those, how to succeed, and influence people. I read all those books, and I just came back a year later and applied for the program, and he had PCS. There was another guy I was dealing with, but I guess at that point I met the requisites and made the impression they wanted. But I mean, they basically were like, it was just sure to get the fuck out of my office.
Yeah, that's tough to hear right there.
I mean, but I did. I walked in like, I mean, I was kind of a street kid, and I even though I was in college and, I was kind of going through the motions, but I didn't understand how the world worked from a business side. You know what I mean? And really that there is a type of individual the military wants, and they're looking at as a possible leader. You know what I mean? And I didn't make that impression at all.
Right.
And thankfully, like I said, 40 years backwards, 40 years backwards, that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, and it pushed me to grow in a way that I don't think I would have grown in organically if I hadn't kind of had that kick in the ass.
Yeah, that's important right there. I wonder, especially as you take the Marine Corps route with a family that was not in the military, how did your mom or your older brother receive it when you said, "Hey, this is where I'm going"?
They were supportive. My mom was supportive. It's funny.
You didn't make her cry? Like,
she didn't freak out. I mean, she was resigned to it because she had hoped I'd grow out of it. But once she realized I was doing it, she was pretty proud. She came to all my graduations, and it kind of fast forward a few years later. I didn't know this till after she passed away. When she'd get together with her friends, and they'd be bragging about my son, she had this laminated picture of a newspaper article from Valdosta, Georgia, where I was stationed, of me getting my DFC. And she laminated it and kept it in that giant purse that the ladies carry, she had one of those purses that had everything in existence in it. And she would pull this bad boy out. But I didn't know this. Her friend told me this after she passed away, and I was found it and going through stuff. And she said, yeah, your mom would pull this out every time somebody was talking about their kids or whatever. So, she supported me. And my older brother was always supportive of it. He was he didn't understand when I decided I got out, and when I went back in, he was like, why are you going back? Blah, 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 blah. But I mean, in the end of the day, my family was real supportive. I just, the reality is it wasn't my mom's first choice for me, but she never she wasn't one of these people who said, really tried to push me to do anything, and she also, quite frankly, she was so busy working, trying to keep a roof over her head and all this kind of stuff. Like, she didn't have the time or the energy to really sit there and do it. She was busy surviving. And so, and that's the thing. I grew up largely unsupervised because she was working all the time. And so, but she, as long as I didn't stray too far off the path, I mean, when I became a father, and especially of teenage girls, I did call her and say I was sorry because I put her through a lot of stuff. I mean, I have a report card from 8th grade where her response is, please help me. You know what I mean? I kept that, actually. I have that report card.
I love that.
Please help me, because I was a little out of control. But and so anyway, jumping back, I was accepted in the program. And then I made my second big mistake as far as the Marine Corps was. This platoon leaders class program has two options. You can do 2 6-week summers, or you could do the 1 12-week program. Now, again, being an idiot, I was like, well, if I do the 2 6 weeks, I can salvage some of my summers. I can go out to the Hamptons and hang out on the beach and blah, blah, blah. And I would say this to anybody listening who is thinking of being a Marine officer. You go to the 10-week or 12-week program. Do not do the 2 6 weeks. It's simply going to boot camp twice. It is absolutely the dumbest thing you can do. And it was horrible. But again, it tested my fortitude, because I think 6 of us from my officer selection office went that first summer. And then the next summer, it was only me and another guy who came back.
Wow.
So that was a dumb idea, because basically you do the same. You get off the bus, you're getting yelled at, you're getting your ass kicked again.
You just do it twice.
Yeah, and this is the 80s, different Marine Corps than now. They might have put their hands on us a little bit. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different, and but again, it was a rude awakening for me. My first day, I was a heavy sleeper. I grew up in the city, so external noise doesn't bother me. I literally grew up with sirens outside.
Where in the city were you?
I grew up in Manhattan. So
right.
Cars, people screaming in the building. And so external noise. So I'm a heavy sleeper. The first day I don't wake up. I woke up on the deck with a kick to the ribs. You know what I mean? And that was my introduction to the Marine Corps. So it was interesting. It was a little tough, but I just wouldn't quit. I talked so much shit about being a Marine, quite frankly, that I couldn't go back.
You couldn't go back.
Yeah. And that's the thing about OCS. You can't quit after a certain point, and they'll kick you to the curb if you don't meet the requirements. I mean, there is an attrition rate there. That's the main difference between boot camp and OCS is there's a difference in the attrition rate. Most guys will get through boot camp barring an injury or something, some health issue or something that comes up. Very few guys just get told you're not cut out for this. In OCS, you were told, hey, you have zero leadership qualities. You're not cutting it. The PT was harder. That much. All the prior enlisted guys said the PT was harder because, like in the Army, the Marine Corps, the officer's supposed to lead by example. So you're expected to have a pretty solid PT score. So it was a bit down and going back twice.
Well, with having a great PT score, how did you find your way to become a pilot? Because I feel like for us, usually you got to have bad PT scores to go in.
The cool thing about the Marine Corps Platoon Leaders Class program is they have what's called the air contract, right? So you apply for the program, you get accepted, you take I don't know what it's the Naval Aviation Qualification Test. I don't remember the name of it. You take the test, you pass it, you go for a flight physical, you pass that, you get an aviation contract.
Great. So you knew from the start.
From the start, barring any injuries, and again, it didn't work out perfectly as my career indicates, but per what was supposed to happen, I graduate OCS. I go back and finish my senior year. May of '84, I'm commissioned a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And then all new lieutenants go to the basic school, which is a 6-month course at Quantico. It's kind of a hybrid of maybe a small unit tactics course where you learn how to do things up to the platoon level on the infantry side, and also a combination of just learning about the administrivia of being an officer, of fitness reports, enlisted evaluations, all the administrivia that you're going to be faced with as a military officer. And it's a 6-month course, and it culminates in a 3-day war out in the field in Virginia. And we get back from the 3-day war, and they call us in the auditorium, and I'm completely paraphrasing here, but they go, hey, man, it sucks to be you guys. The Marine Corps has too many aviators on both ends of the pipeline. So here are your options. You can drop your air contract voluntarily, and we'll give you any MOS you want, regardless of your class standing, because a lot of the MOSs were competitive. Yeah. So they were like, regardless of your standing in the class, you'll get any MOS you want. So a lot of guys took that. And then the rest of us, they said, you're going to spend 18 to 24 months where we need you in the Marine Corps. You can fill out your dream sheet, but unless you're a stud in class, unless you're in the top 5% of class, you're probably going to we'll stick you where we need lieutenants. I was not in the 5% of the class, and I had orders to the 7th Truck Battalion, Camp Pendleton, California.
Dang.
So needless to say, I was a little upset, but I was like, okay, I'll do this for 18 to 24 months. I'll try to be a kick-ass guy, and we'll get to flight school. Well, one of my fellow lieutenants, his dad was a Navy admiral, an aviator. And as you know, naval aviation encompasses the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Coast Guard, right? So he walks over to his Marine counterpart, basically goes, WTF, And they go, well, here's the situation. And he goes, the Navy's kind of hurting for our pilot training requirement. Do you think any of these guys would be interested in swapping over to the Navy? So that evolves into a few weeks later, 2 Navy 06s show up to Quantico, and they go, hey, guys, we're hurting. Any of you guys interested in becoming Navy ensigns and going to flight school right away? So now this involved 5 companies of the basic school. The basic school puts X amount of companies a year. The main reason I said yes is I had finished the basic school, so I had nothing to prove in the Marine Corps. My next step was Pensacola. So there was nothing else I was going to do in the Marine Corps, so I didn't feel like I was leaving any unfinished business, right? So basically, long story short, about 150 Marine lieutenants took this deal and swapped over to the Navy. Now, a funny aside to that is,
wow,
you're set up like a company. So you're basically a company of lieutenants, right? So it's 4 platoons. Hotel company was made up of 4 platoons, and the platoon leaders were called student platoon commanders. They were captains who had been in the fleet, who've done a tour either as an infantry officer, whatever their MOS was, or as aviators. So in my company, we had 2 infantry officers and 2 aviators. The first infantry officer, I'll never forget this guy. His name was Captain Loxon. He was a prior enlisted guy, looked like a Cro-Magnon man with a square jaw, jacked arms, you know how the Marines roll up their sleeves. So part of that is you can't have scrawny arms. You work on your biceps so you can fill out that roll up thing. But he would just look the part. And he was an infantry officer, and they all got a chance to give us their opinion on this thing and what they thought. So he pulls no punches. He goes, I'd rather dig ditches in the Marine Corps than fly airplanes in the Navy. Any of you guys take this deal, you're a fucking traitor, and I want nothing to do with you. He walks out. So we're like, oh, okay, cool. The other guy comes in, the other infantry officer. He's a different kind of cat, lean, Ivy League educated dude, much more measured. He's like, you guys got to do what you got to do. I respect it. I understand, some of you, this is your dream. I respect what your decision you make. Good luck. The 2 aviators come in and they go, listen, we'll deny this if anyone asks us this, but if you guys don't take this deal, you're fucking stupid. And they walk out. And so that was it. So so we all look at each other, and I don't know, about 2-3 months later, we got some paperwork, and I got my DD 214 from the Marine Corps, sidestepped over and sworn as an ensign in the Navy, let my hair grow, and swapped uniforms. And
Yogi, was that tough to handle? Like that idea? I mean, being a Marine is a really specific and coveted thing. How hard?
I'll be honest. To this day, I have a certain level of regret, and I have some odd regrets, kind of weird, like that I never served in combat as a Marine, and I do have regrets, but there were so many variables in that 18 months that could have happened, that could have derailed me getting to flight school, that I still think I made the right choice. But it was tough. But on the other hand, any little success I've had in the military, as an officer, as a leader, was because of the values and principles instilled in me in the Marine Corps. And I earned the title Marine. It's still a very proud thing to me. On my tombstone somewhere will be the word Marine. The Marine Corps changed my life for the better, and the Marine Corps taught me things that made me grow into the somewhat decent human being I am. I mean, it was a very transformative experience for me, and I drank the Kool-Aid, and I think the Marine Corps is possibly one of the greatest institutions we have in this country, and mainly because of the history, because of the, and I don't know what it is. It's an intangible thing that being a Marine does, but it is amazing institution, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have been a Marine. And yes, I do regret that things didn't work out the way they did. But that said, they worked out okay as well. You know, I can't. I met my wife when I was a Navy pilot. You know, so you know that led to the amazing family, kids and grandkids I have. You know.
Yeah. Well, hell, I mean, timing wise, I'm trying to make sure I got this straight, but we're talking probably like 85 as you move over to the Navy.
85, March of 85 is when I moved over to the Navy and went to flight school, and I stayed in the Navy till January of 91. I flew CH-53Es.
So let's fly. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this. So first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that Top Gun comes out right around then. So I would imagine
I got my wings about 3 weeks after Top Gun came out.
I mean, the surge in applicants that I've heard from that must have just been insane. So timing wise, you probably also lucked out there that the Marine Corps had a backlog, but I believe that the Navy did after that movie came out.
It may be in a single dude naval aviator, probably. I mean, it was the equivalent of being a rock star for a while. And I'll tell you, my mom got sick, and I worked in the World Trade Center. They let me do permissive TDY, right? And so my mom was sick, and there was really no one to help her with her recovery, and we had some big maintenance problems with the CH-53. So like they were going to be grounded for 3, 4, 5 months. So none of us were doing anything anyway, except mustering every morning, and then, you know, being paid by the government to do nothing, go to the beach. So I went up to New York. I worked in the Navy Officer Selection Office in the World Trade Center. I wore my Good Humor Man outfit to work every day, and I would visit my brother, who was a commodities trader there, and then you know, I had my brand new gold wings. And I mean, so it's just, you walk out for lunch, it's just hundreds of little secretaries, you know, and this, I mean, it was just, I mean, you could have been a hunchback and got a date. You know what I mean?
I love it.
Great time, man. It was. The timing couldn't have been better. But
you threaded the needle on that one, I think. So
no, I got, look, I'm the king of bad timing, but I've had some good luck, and I've also, you know, I'm one of these guys. I got to figure a way to work this, you know, and it worked out. So, you know, I went to flight school. Used to feel bad for you guys who drive down from Rucker for the weekend. Oh my
God.
Yeah. Guys out and shit. Guys be like, yeah, I'm in Fort Rucker. And we'd be like, dude, what's it like up there? You know, but cause you guys would always come down. We would constantly from Army flight school and just, you know, partying and stuff. So
wait, hold on. We got to pause here for a second, just for people who aren't aware. I mean, you're on a beach learning to fly, and we are in this really isolated part of Alabama where there's nothing but like farm fields, because you have to be able to fly at night, and we don't need to fly around water. So we're way inland, and literally every Friday evening, you've got like 400 guys getting in a car driving for the coast.
Yeah, man, look, that's not always good. Pensacola was tough because the amount of distraction, you know, you could derail your whole flight school experience. And I got in a little trouble. I mean, I got told to move on base, right? Because I was in a house with 5 guys. But what I did was I got a BOQ room. I threw a couple of uniforms in there and some clothes. And every morning on my way into work, I'd stop by the room. I'd pull the covers back. I'd roll around in the bed. I'd turn the water on in the sink so it looked like I'd been in there, and then go to work, because there was no way I was living on base. I'm at the beach with 5 guys, and it was a great time. I muddled my way through.
Yogi, let's talk about the 53. How I'm not familiar with the Navy career track as that happens. So you go to flight school. Is it everyone together who's going fixed wing separately? Everybody who's doing rotary wing?
Here's how it works. You go to primary flight training, and I don't think it's changed much now, even with so you go to primary flight training, which is in the fixed wing, which was at the time was the T-34C Turbo Mentor. I think they still have a few left, but it's probably transitioned almost entirely to the T6 now. So you do that, you get through that, and then you go to intermediate, which is basically basic instruments, right, in the fixed wing. You get through that, and then you make your selection. Jets, helos, props, right? I just, for whatever reason at that point, we had a couple of orientation rides in the helicopters and stuff, because every now and then during the course of flight school, helicopters would come down and give you orientation rides, or guys would get orientation rides in the jets, or the P3 would come down. And I don't know. And I'd always been fascinated by the Huey, watching the Vietnam footage. It's just, for some reason, I was drawn to helicopters. So on my dream sheet, I'd put helos, 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 right? And pretty much that, if you put that there, like, obvious, because the jet guys, they're looking for the top 10, 20% of the class. The prop guys, you know, a lot of guys ask for that or whatever. So if you put helos, you're going to get helos, you know, and I got it. So then you go to the health, it's all at Whiting Field. You didn't, you know, some of the other aircraft, there's a little moving around, but at Whiting Field, which is in Milton, the helicopter side is on just the other side of the base. So I went through the helicopter. There's there was the HT-8, which is the initial helicopter training squadron, and then you go on to HT-18. There's a few others now where you do your instrument training and some of your tactical training. And so I think I got to flight school May of 85, and I got my wings in August of 86. And I didn't have any real delays, or, you know, just the first 3 months of flight school are like water survival, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then academics before you start flying. So I think it took about a year and a half to get through flight school.
I had talked before, Yogi, on one of the interviews, just describing learning to hover and kind of how crazy it is. Do you feel, I guess you wouldn't, there's no way to know, but the fact that you had flown fixed wing beforehand, do you feel like that gave you an advantage once you got into hover?
Not only no, but fuck no. Okay.
It's it's an ego killer, huh?
I'll tell you the class. I'm sure it's happened to a lot of others, right? First flight out, flying with the IP. We go to the outlying field. You know, I've been to Rucker a few times. I've been to a couple of courses at Rucker. So, you know, it's pretty much the same thing. They take you out to the outlying field. He pulls it up into a hover, right? He's like, makes it look like it's the easiest fucking thing in the world, right? And he's like, okay, I'm going to give you the cyclic. So he gives you the cyclic, right? And he goes, okay, put your feet on the pedals. Mess around with the pedals. I'm going to give you the pedals. Okay, so you're on that. And of course he's on the controls with you. And you're like, oh, it's not too bad. Yeah, it's not so hard. He goes, okay, I'm going to give you the collective, right? And he goes, okay. And, you know, at this time, he's kind of got like one finger on the cyclic, you know, and you're in a pretty solid hover. And he goes, and I never forget, this guy looks at me, he goes, keep it in Florida. Gave me the controls, and, you know, you know, and I went home back to my house that night, almost crying, going, I fucked up, because I'm never going to get this. I'm never going to get through flight school. And you're right. I had felt pretty confident, you know, mastered kind of the fixed wing stuff, instrument flying.
Yeah, that's no joke.
The Navy's pretty, you know, and I think Rutgers the same, but they really emphasize the instrument shit. It's not just like, you know, you're shooting approaches, and so you're feeling pretty good about knowing where you are, handling an airplane. You feel like you got some good air sense, and then you get in this contraption, and you're like, I screwed up. I should have went P3s or something, because I remember going, I'm hosed right now. I'm never going to get through flight school. And then one day the hover light comes on, you know, you're sitting there, and one day you're just like, oh, okay.
It just works.
No, and everybody has the same story. Just one day you get in it, you're like, here we go again. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, I'm kind of hovering. You know, when it just comes on.
And that's funny what you mentioned with keep it in Florida. I'm gonna interview my old man here probably in the next 6 months, and he was in Vietnam, but he told me a story. I'll have to ask him again, but I can't remember if it was him or a guy in his class. They were flying at night out of Alabama, doing a cross country flight, and I think it was him. He's like looking at the map with his co-pilot. He's like, all right, I think we're over here, but the lake should be on this side. And they're like, that is the ocean right there. You're no longer in Alabama. You're over the Gulf of Mexico.
And it happens. I mean, That's what makes this whole thing great, though, is I can talk to a guy who flew in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and they're all going to have some crazy story like that, about trying. But I'll never forget that. He looked at me and just said, "See if you can keep it in Florida."
Love it.
And I was like, "What's he talking about?" And then, it was ridiculous.
Oh, all right.
And I had flown a helicopter before.
Okay.
I paid for a lesson in college. And that one, the guy crashed. The guy was showing me auto rotations and we crashed.
He was showing you autos during a...
Okay,
wow.
There's another. I'm telling you, I got some funny stories.
I love it.
I'm a junior in college. I've already, because I went to Embry-Riddle my first semester of college. So I got about 40 hours of flight time. Flunked out, but I did get 40 hours of flight time. So I'm like, let me see this helicopter thing. So I save up money because it's like $120 an hour, even back then, right? I go out, Bell H-13, from MASH, right? We go out on the north end of Long Island. At low tide, there's all these sand spits that are there. And I'm going to show you a couple auto rotations, right? So he shows me like 2 or 3. And then on this one, I'm looking and I remember going, I just think he ought to flare by now, but he must know what he's doing, right? So we flare, and then all I remember is bing, bang, boom, bing, bang, boom, boom, boom. Everything stops. I look over at him. He's leaning out of the aircraft going, oh, shit, oh, shit. So I look at what he's looking at. About 5 feet away is the tail rotor and a section of drive shaft sticking out of the sand. And that erector set tail boom is bent at a 45-degree angle. And so it just shows how dumb you are when you're like 20. I'm going, well, I guess he sort of effed this up. Shit, I'm not going to have to pay for this lesson, right? So anyway, just so happens a Nassau County police helicopter was flying over. They radio him because he still had the radio on. He tells them the company sends out another helicopter to pick us up, right? We get back and everybody's being super nice to me. And I'm just like, hey, yeah, but I'm not going to have to pay for this lesson, right? And they're like, no, you're good. Matter of fact, come out for another one. Because I'm too stupid to go. My back should be hurting right now. So they're completely nice, but so now fast forward, I'm a winged aviator and I talked to some guy who flew those things in the Army, right? And he's like, you're very lucky. I go, really? Because I was like, that was what made me think you could fly helicopters and crash and walk away. I thought it was the cool. He goes, if that thing had went over, that firewall behind the cockpit is made of aluminum, right? The tranny would have come through that. And if it didn't kill you, it would have sprayed you with hot oil, right? So you would have been hosed. You know what I mean? But it just shows you ignorance is bliss. But that was my first helicopter ride ever. But and I literally came away from that going, helicopters are cool as shit, man. You could crash. Because when I was at Embry-Riddle, like we had a kid got killed, doing stalls or whatever, didn't approach turn, and plus just the airport, there were always these light plane crashes. So I was like, man, you could crash in these helicopters and walk away. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Damn. So in the Navy with the different flight profiles, if you're a helo pilot, are you basically going to be doing CSAR? Are there other mission sets that you can be tracking?
There is a CSAR mission in the Navy. I just wasn't part of it. I did what was called vertical onboard delivery, right? I didn't do mine sweeping. We did the same thing as the Marine Corps CH-53s, except we didn't have as much of an assault mission. Although I did do some stuff along those lines in the Philippines during some of the unrest there. But mainly we were trash haulers. We basically were logistic chain to the fleet from either other ships or the shore. Like I was stationed in the Philippines, and our job was to hit the carrier battle groups as they came through near the Philippines and needed resupplies, I've carried everything from jet engines to newspapers for the Admiral to, Marines, SEALs. We kind of a jack of all trades, just trash hauling. I've lifted an 18,000-pound bulldozer up to an area of the Philippines that got really damaged by a hurricane. It was a great mission because you never knew what you were going to do on any day. The issue was flying out at sea at night. This is pre-night vision goggles, right? Yeah. Again, people ask me what that's like. I said, go in your closet and turn the light out. And that's what flying at night over the ocean is, without vision. Every night flight's an instrument flight, unless there's really a giant moon so you can see the horizon. But then if that's the case, if the water's smooth, you get that reflection, and then that can screw you up. So
I know you got a good story for an approach you made out at sea, right? And now I have not flown over water. I've just heard how difficult it is landing on a ship, let alone just flying out there. So I'd love to hear this one.
Yeah, so I was a fairly new guy, still a nugget, as they call new naval aviators. And we're doing our shipboard quals, and your standard shipboard qual back then, again, because I'm dated, especially on my Navy stuff, was 5-day landings and 5 night landings, right? So do the day ones and wait till it gets dark, and we'll do the night ones. And like typical military shit, there's 6 of us pilots doing it, and the instructor pilot, we're all rotating through, and the instructor pilot is, smoke. This is when you can still smoke, and he's just chain smoking away because he's flying with these new guys. He's just like, trying to get this over with. And so it's my turn. We were operating off a 2-spot amphibious ship. And the lights weren't working properly, but they were working enough to get the training done, right? So we didn't have the deck edge lights. You just had the lineup lights, right? Which was basically 3, lineup lights that you would basically turn, find a line up on and start your approach. Well, off the coast of the Philippines, you have these fishermen, and they have these boats called banca boats. They're basically these little outrigger canoes, right? And they go fishing at night with their nets, and they all have lanterns on them. And there's hundreds of them out there, because that's how these guys make a living. They do their net fishing, and usually, there's scattered lights here or there. It's pretty easy to tell that that's not where you're going. Well, I'm turning final on the ship. I got 3 nice lights lined up, right? And it's dark as, 3 feet up a cow's ass. So you can't tell the structure of the ship until you're probably 200-300 feet, even with the searchlight, And so I'm lining up. I'm feeling good. I'm like, I'm going to nail this approach. And he's not saying anything. So I'm thinking, okay, we're good. Now, on the ship, you have what's called a tower flower. There's always a pilot. Whenever there's flight ops going on, there's a pilot from the unit doing flight ops that's in the tower with the controller and all that. Well, unlike a carrier, being the controller on a lot of the smaller ships is an additional duty, and it's not necessarily an aviator or an ATC guy who's doing it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the pilot who was in there, and Jeff Ballard, I still keep in touch with the guy on Facebook. I remember I was on this approach, and I'm feeling good, and I'm like, I should see the structure, I should see the deck any minute, and I'm just thinking, man, for a new guy, I nailed this approach. And all of a sudden I hear wave off, right? So it's just automatic. You just pull in collective, and thankfully the 53's got power to spare, especially we didn't have anything on board, not a lot of gas. So we take off. I go to my 300 feet, 80 knots, and I'm like lying. He goes, all right, come back around and try it again. Come back around. I land on the ship. I'm like, what's going on? I think I was the last guy. I don't remember, but anyway, it's debrief time. And he's like, yeah, you Yogi basically almost flew into the water, like at it was at the point where the spray was coming over your rotor disc, which means I was probably 75 feet. You know, I don't remember, you know, the 53 hovered at 75 feet, and over the water, you could still get some spray over the rotor disc at that height, but it was well, you know, so I was probably descending through like 50 feet or whatever I would have thrown. And it was just 3 bunker boats that just happened to be lined up, you know, like that. And, you know, but that's naval aviation, man.
Oh.
You know, aircraft flying in the water all the time. I mean, it's not an unusual event, you know, because especially pre-goggles. Like, I got to land on a ship with goggles in the Air Force, and I was like, this is friggin' cool. You know, you can see it. You know what I mean? Because
it makes a huge difference.
I mean, just but that, you know, look, I'm a very proud naval aviator, and that's what separates naval aviators from everyone else, is that they operate in this crazy environment routinely at night. And, you know, a lot of times the ship's the only game in town. And if the weather's crap, you know, because there's pitch and roll limitations. You know, oh, if it's pitching this much or rolling this much, we can't do flight ops. Well, guess what? You know, because whenever you take off from the ship, they give you a range and bearing to nearest land, right? Well, you know, when you take off from a ship and it's like nearest land, you know, 1,622 miles at 030 or whatever it is.
Jesus.
You know, you're like, you know, so the ship's the only game in town.
You gotta land there.
Gotta land on it, you know, and so sometimes, you know, that's what, you know, makes you, you know, that's what separates naval aviators from non-naval aviators. And that's why naval aviators tend to be a little cocky, is because, you know, and I think bringing the helo aboard, I'll argue, is just as difficult as bringing the jet aboard. You know what I mean? I mean, I may get some pushback from fighter guys, but I'm telling you, man, bringing the helo aboard, especially on some small decks that are really moving, it's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I there's been many times where I was like, I am going to die in the middle of the ocean. They're never going to find me. And this is how it's going to, you know, this is how it's going to end. And you know, but it was a lot of fun, a lot of instrument flying, you know, just really challenge you and makes you grow as an aviator, you know, and it gets you used to being uncomfortable, just because, you know, when you're flying over water, there's just nowhere else to go. And you just have to kind of make peace with that. That's your environment. And so it kind of helps you it helps you deal with stress. It helps you stay calm and function, because the whole thing itself, if you sit and think about it, is pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah. You know, that's such a good point. I've never really thought of this, but as I look back to Afghanistan, flying Apaches there, you know, it was so restrictive. Our power margin was so slim. And when you take off up in the mountains with a full load of gas and weapons, I mean, you have to land with that. You know, if something comes up, you got to be able to land. And it's not an easy landing to make. And it really forces you to think hard about, like, all right, if I run into a problem here, here's my route out of this. Here's where I'm going to go. Here's how I'm going to do it. And you know, it's going to be a hard landing, no matter how you cut it up. And I would imagine the same thing if you're taking off from a ship. Like, you may not have a choice. If you're doing search and rescue, or you got to go deliver something, you got to land back on there, whether the sea is calm or not.
You know, any Navy pilot's got, because here's the problem: the ship tells you where it's going to be, doesn't mean it's always going to be there.
Good point.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think any naval aviator has stories about getting low on gas at night, you know, going, how's this going to end up? Yeah. You know, I really don't think there's a Navy pilot out there, no matter what they flew, that operated off ships, whether it be fixed wing or rotary wing, that they're not, I'm tight on gas. I can't find the ship. My tack end's not work. You know, they're not coming up on the radio. The tack end's not working, whatever. Yeah. And so, yeah, but well, look, I believe Afghanistan is the most challenging environment for helicopters in the world, that we've operated, that the United States military is operating. And I'd say probably Everest might be more challenging, but just, not just the Apaches, the Pavehawks, we were operating at 22,000 pounds, which your average Hawk is, operating at 16, 17,000. The shit hooks, everybody was just, that's a crazy place to be operating, you're routinely operating at 7,000 feet or above. And I had to dump fuel on our own guys once to get in an LZ. Yeah.
Really?
We're going to crash otherwise. There's just no other option. We got to dump some gas, and we were getting in for a MEDEVAC, so we didn't have time to go and climb and, do that. It was, an emergent situation. So when we realized we weren't going to get in, we came off and just did this wide thing and dumped some gas. And there were guys in the middle of a fight down there. Hopefully it dissipated before it got, I never really heard anything about it, but we had to do what we had to do, because Afghanistan is the place of a lot of close calls. I don't think anybody, I think if you put me, you, and 6 other pilots in a bar that flew in Afghanistan, we could sit around for hours talking about the time this almost happened and the time that almost happened, just because the place was just set up for that. You know what I mean? I was just listening to a podcast, just the mountains, the terrain is just this, it's not a conducive place to fight a war. No. And that's why the locals have been kicking everybody's ass, to include ours, for the last couple of 100 years, because they
know the terrain.
They live there. They know it, and all our technology, all our this, power margins are, that's where I learned to manage power. I never really had to manage power.
And Yogi, can I ask, I think it's worthwhile for people who are listening, especially who aren't as familiar with flying, but when we're talking about the power margin, just briefly, how would you describe that to them? Why is it you had to do a go around? You couldn't come into land. Why did you have to drop fuel? What does that do to the aircraft?
Okay. So, your aircraft, to keep it simple and not be not try to make it boring, you have, your aircraft is limited in power. It has a limit of the power that engine and transmission will put out. And sometimes that limit of that power is exceeded by your rate of descent or your weight, so you just can't control the aircraft as well, when you won't be able to stop it at the bottom, for lack of a better term. So if you're landing in a high LZ and you're heavy and it's hot and high, if you don't set up your approach properly, as your rate of descent increases and you try to add power to arrest that rate of descent, well, at some point it's going to say no power for you. Yeah. And then the aircraft is going to still do what it's got to do. So when you're in that situation, if you recognize it early enough, which thankfully in that situation we did, we were able to wave off and fly it off, but we knew we weren't going to get in that. That LZ was about 9,500 feet. God. And so we had to dump some gas, and we just dumped some gas and were able to get in there and made it back to the FARP. But, also, you can dump gas because there's FARPs everywhere, and
True.
So call a tanker if we had to, but at the time there was still some FARP, there's FOBs and FARPs everywhere. So you can get somewhere to get a little gas, but
yeah. So the FARP, for those who don't know, is the forward arming and refueling point, like a little gas station that's positioned conveniently.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, it's all right. It's all right. God, I was just coming back to one other thing I wanted to mention for those who haven't been over and done this type of flight profile. What we often ran into, and I'd love to hear your perspective, especially doing the CSAR thing later on. When we were doing mission planning with, an SF team or some infantry unit, if it's a summertime and they're talking to Black Hawk pilots, they're like, all right, we want 11 guys on this bird. We got to have 11. And they're like, you can only get 7. Sorry. And it's really, over time, you got to learn to operate with fewer people or making more passes and changing your timeline. It is not easy. And I would imagine as a search and rescue pilot, you probably run into that when you're going in to pull someone out. How do you prioritize?
We had internal tanks. So, the Pave Hawk is, has so much extra shit on it that, it's not unusual for you to operate at 22,000 pounds, which is max gross, right? So depending on where it was, you could take less gas. Hopefully you could get a tanker, or you could figure out where you can get gas either on the way back or on the, some of our missions were pretty long too. So, we could get to the objective, get the person out, but then we'd have to figure out a way to get gas to be able to get all the way back, so, and so you got to do some pretty intense mission planning in a fairly short period of time. But, we would take less gas. Plus we had a minimum crew. Like we had to have at least 2 PJs on board and all their shit. And they got a lot of shit.
They do.
They got jaws of life depending on the mission. So, they tailored it for each flight or each mission, or if we were just supporting an operation, they would have a basic load. And then other times we had Rangers on board as part of the crew as well for site security. So, weight was always an issue. Even before the war, when we were flying in Turkey, Northern Watch, we used to be at this place called Sirnak, which is about 20 miles from the northern Iraqi border in Turkey. And it's a really cool base. The Turks carved it out of the side of a mountain. And it's almost like a ship stuck in the side of a mountain. It has like this sort of flight, this short runway, and the Turks would operate out of there. And it had a base hospital, and they were doing their operations against the Kurds in that valley. But we would come in and sit alert during Northern Watch. So we'd land and set up our SATCOM and just wait while the aircraft were over Iraq in case something happened. Well, if we didn't fly, when we took off from there to head back to Diyarbakir, which is where we were living out of, right? I would have to have my hand on the fuel dump because there was a set of wires we had to get over. And if we didn't think we could get over, I'd have to dump gas and try to go down the side of the mountain because, it was in the summer, it was brutal. And it used to drive me nuts because the Turks were flying their Alpha Lima models and, they were at 15,000 pounds. So they just pull up on the collective and go straight up. We could barely get a 10-foot, we would take off. We'd start at the end of their little thing and we sort of try to
slow
ground effect and ETL to use ETL to get out of there. Just the Pave Hawk is just a conglomeration, just adding stuff to the aircraft as technologies came about. And, the whiskey model, the new one, I have friends, they call it the Fat Wendy because that thing's already, even with the 701D engines and all that, it's already a fat pig that's power limited, with the stuff that's put on it. So, you're operating this aircraft, it's max gross all the time not at sea level, right? So at altitude. So it's always a challenge. And, I think that and the dust are the two things that make that fine dust in Afghanistan that no one really understands. That makes it just the most horrible, challenging place to fly helicopters.
It's so true. And so I want to get to Anaconda in particular. And I think we're going to end up jumping through just the 90s almost, but going back to something you mentioned at the beginning, which was, you didn't have great timing, but I would say I would have killed to have been in Anaconda. In a positive way, I would say, but I'd like to get to this if we can, and that role that you played there. But I do know what we're going to say is you started out as a Marine, you transitioned to Navy. I think in the 90s you were in the Army Guard, and then you make your way over to the Air Force, right? By the time
I'll go over the Army Guard. So I got out of the Navy, and I thought I wanted to, the deployments, and I had a new kid, and my other daughter and I thought I wanted to be home, and the corporate world seemed like it might be a good deal, and all these headhunters are like, oh, we love junior military officers and we'll hook you up and blah, 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 blah. So I fall into this foolishness, and I end up getting a corporate job with Airborne Express back in New York. And I'm not kidding. About a month into it, I was like, this was the worst mistake I ever made.
I did that too. Yep.
Couldn't get back in the Navy. You know, I went to them, hey, can I come back? And they're like, no, too bad, so sad. You know, and this is in the middle of the first Gulf War, right? So I'm thinking they'd take me back right away. And they're like, nah, see ya. You know, so I watched that war on TV, you know, and the corporate thing doesn't work out, and my buddy Rick, matter of fact, he just called me. He's been working in the theater business in New York his whole life, selling tickets, and that's a union job, real good job, pays very well, and so he offers me that job, and I take it, and really great gig. I mean, I worked some hit shows, Showboat, Rent. I mean, I worked some great shows and a few extra bucks to be made selling tickets, and just is a good gig. But I really miss flying. And so I got in the Army. I shotgunned all my paperwork out to every reserve guard unit in the New York, New Jersey area. The Army Guard comes back first. I'll make it fast. I luck out, become a W-2 flying Hueys in the Army National Guard out on Long Island. Honestly, from a military tactical point of view, not so much. From just a fun, being able to fly, good gig point of view, awesome. I'm a W-2. I have no responsibilities. I'm flying this iconic aircraft, right? You know, you don't just fly 2 weeks a month, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks. You know, you got to have your RL progressions, you know, as an Army. So I'm flying 2-3 times a week. I'm just driving out there. And I don't know if you're familiar with AFTPs, but the additional flight duty training periods, basically you got paid for 4 hours was a full day's pay. So if you overlapped your flying over past 12 noon, you got 2 days pay, right? So it was just a really good gig. And I'm flying Hueys. Then we'd have drill weekend, and the lieutenant, who has maybe 21 flight hours, you know, would be like, we're going to do this, that, and the other, and brief it. He'd walk out in the W-4 and go, we're not doing that. We're flying down to Atlantic City. We're going to have some lunch. I know a good Chinese buffet down there. We're going to go, and then we'll fly low level back and blah, 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 blah. And we'll tell the lieutenant we did this training. Okay. And, we would do stuff like that, you know, when we go to the buffet, and the lady would get upset when all of us walked in to see all these big W-4s. She'd be, you eat too much. No, you in the buffet, you eat all you know, she would joke around and but it was always something like that. And we'd support the West Point cadets. Yep. Couple of ATs, I went up to Fort Drum and we did real military stuff, but you know, it was just that kind of stuff for 4 years. It was great. You know, made a lot of good friends that I'm still friends with now, and just really, I feel blessed to have gotten to fly such an iconic aircraft as the Huey. It was a lot of fun, and I was pretty happy there. But then an opening came up for the Air Guard unit on Long Island, which did the CSAR mission, right? And I was always kind of like, thought that was a cool mission, but you could never get in that unit. And I was the perfect storm unit. Matter of fact, I flew with all the guys.
Oh, wow.
I flew with all the guys who were in that incident. Colonel Ravola, who ditched it. The guy, I mean, I flew with every one of those guys who ditched that aircraft when we spent time in the water. But there was an opening and I got in, and it was great. And they were training me in-house. So that was going kind of slow. You know, getting qualified in the aircraft and blah, blah, blah. But it was great. I flew with some great pilots, great mission, all kinds of cool TDYs. I mean, it was fun. And then I went back to being a captain so I went from W-2 back to captain. And then they said, hey, we have an opening at the schoolhouse in Kirtland. Would you go there and be willing to just knock it out in 3 months? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I told my boss that I was going to do it. And since my buddy was my boss, he was like, okay. And I get out there and I'm in the schoolhouse and training. And then, you know, I'm in there with all the active duty guys. And they're like, man, we're really hurting for pilots. I mean, the Air Force is really hurting right now because they stopped training pilots at Rucker for about a year or two, and now it's coming back to bite us. And just so happens their assignments guy was there at Kirtland Air Force Base. And I grabbed the guy in the hallway and I go, hey, can I come back on active duty for like a couple of years? And he's like, did your unit pay for you to go to flight school? I'm like, no, I'm just a regular reservist. I joined from I told him my deal. And he goes, put in the package, and if your commander approves it, I'll bring you on for 2-year orders.
Whoa.
So I did it. My commander approved it. I got on, and September 1st, 1998, I went back on active duty. And a couple of years later, I found out I was eligible for the bonus. And so I took it. But what I didn't know is that I was in the Air Force less than a year when my first majors board came up. But I didn't have any of the Air Force pedigree that they want.
Yeah.
So I got passed over like right away. So now they're like, dude, you're going to end up being a captain. You can stay to 20, but you're going to end up being a captain. And I got the bonus. So I'm like, okay, I don't care. Yeah, I don't really care. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, well, I'll just be able to fly my whole career. And then I was like, well, passed over captain, I could say whatever I want. I can do whatever I want, And then the war happens, and in an odd way, that was the best thing that ever happened to me from a career standpoint. 9/11 happens, which was really personal for me. My brother worked at the World Trade Center. He survived both bombings. I was pretty sure he was dead most of the day till he called finally. I lost a couple of friends I knew. The whole 9/11 thing, very personal to me, obviously. Sure. So we were out the door pretty quick. My first group of guys left Nellis Air Force Base in November of 2002 to go to Pakistan to start operations there. I followed on just after the new year, but I was pretty excited about being, a chance to get in it at that point. It's kind of odd. I was 40 years old, my first combat, but it was, I was pretty excited.
Yeah. And, so just to clarify, the first unit went over November 2001. Is that right?
From my unit, I was part of the 66 Rescue Squads, and our first detachment went over in November, and then we followed on shortly after the new year.
Got it. All right. And when you
went
in
Jacobabad, Pakistan.
God. So what was that like, man? I mean, we hadn't been to war in a long time. I mean,
it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was, all those emotions, you're scared, you're excited. You're like, Pakistan was weird because, we started flying these long, it was like 2 hours to the Afghan border. Then we'd fly 2, 3, 4 hours up to where things were going on to pick up guys there. So we'd fly these incredibly long missions. And what's weird is we wouldn't get shot at in Afghanistan, but we get shot at in Pakistan, like near the border and stuff, but, and then they say, hey, you guys are going to move up to Kandahar after this, shortly after the Marines. The 101st had Kandahar. I think they took it over from the Marines. The 101st and some Canadians had Kandahar. And my boss goes, you are going up there to set up operations, and I want us ready to go in 3 days. So it's me, another guy, and a couple of civil engineers and a few of our maintenance guys to kind of survey everything, right? So we go up there, and they tell us the general smoothed it over with the Army brigade commander there, and they know you're coming, and everything's cool. You know how that works. We get off the airplane, they're like, who the fuck are you guys? And we're like, we're Air Force Rescue, and they're like, we got MEDEVAC. And to make matters worse, the guy they put in charge, this guy, I'm not going to mention his name. He's a good guy, retired in 06, but he's Air Force only, and he didn't understand the dynamics of the Army, So he's telling this Army 06 as a captain, sir, we were told you were going to provide us support and blah, blah, blah. He basically gets off on the wrong foot with this 06. And the 06 became a general. It was Colonel Wazowski, was it whatever, and it was the Roxans had Kandahar at that time, and there's still shooting going on outside the wire. This guy really doesn't know who we are, doesn't want us. He's certainly not going to be talked to by some captain, right? So I see the problem. So I tell this guy, I said, I don't want to, I said, why don't you set up, because they basically gave us a piece of ground to put up our tents and everything. I said, why don't you set up here? Let me go try to talk to them. I can talk Marine and Army, and maybe I could, smooth things over. So I go over and I basically, introduce myself to this guy, and he's already like looking at me like I'm, what's on the bottom of his shoe. So I try to give him a little bit of my pedigree. And then I'm like, sir, if you could help us out, this is what we need. I understand, we got a big brief back at Jacobabad, but my boss is going to be up here in 06, and, can you help us out? And he puts me in touch with his, S2, is it S2 or S3, the logistics guy?
S4 usually.
S4, right? The 4, right? Force. Well, this guy turns out is Puerto Rican dude from New York, this captain. So me and him hit it off right away, right? So we get what we need, and we get it set up, and basically, that's where my being a former Marine and being a W-2 in the Army helped me. Like, I understood, like, the problem in the Air Force is, as a captain, you're around 05s all the time, and you interact with them pretty frequently. So, but I knew, like, hey, you don't fuck with an 05, brigade commander, or whatever, not, battalion guy. You just, there's a difference, there's a deference that you have to show that guy. So I was able to navigate that. We get what we need. We set up our TOC, we set up our tents, we fly our aircraft in a couple of days later, and we know, and the only other units there other than 101st is the Joint Special Operations Command, TF Dagger, that's there, right? Well, my boss was a former special ops guy, and the PJs, a couple of the PJs, so they all know everybody in there. So we're getting a little access to these guys by virtue of having worked, some of our guys knowing them. So we're getting a little more, so we're hearing buzz about this planning for this operation coming up, but we're not involved in any of it. You know what I mean? And these guys are just helping us get set up and just kind of, just taking us under their wing to help us just set up our own ops at the base. So just to show you how bare bones it was, we had a talk with SATCOM to our hire and this, that, and the other. But the only comms we had with the Army talk and the JSOC talk was your old school wire setup. Like, they gave us a Humvee with a comm setup in it and a wire setup, right?
Yep.
Well, with all the vehicles driving around Kandahar, you know how long that lasted, right? Our first mission, this is pre-Anaconda, but our first mission, some sergeant comes running up out of breath. Like, literally, we're standing in the talk. He's like, they need you to launch. And he hands us a piece of paper with some coordinates on it. That's it. He goes, they need you to launch. There's some Australians got hit by a mine, blah, 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 blah. It turned out to be a really big mission because the PJs jumped into a minefield and all this. And I was the talk bitch for that mission. And, but we launched, we beat the MEDEVACs. Right, we get off the ground, we launch, we get there. What happened was an Australian vehicle had gone over an anti-tank mine. It wasn't an armored vehicle. I think it killed one guy and just screwed up everyone else. But it was in the minefield. Our helicopters are en route, but we send a 130 with PJs who parachute into the minefield.
Interesting.
And then they work on these guys. And unfortunately, and then the helicopters get there, they get them in the helos, they get them back. Unfortunately, we lost both guys. Their injuries were too massive. That leads to another kind of good story because one captain made a comment to the PJs about giving up on the patient, and then the captain had to be about 7 of us had to hold the PJ back, and
I imagine you don't mess with them.
The captain, our commander told the captain to get the F out and get out of his sight, because literally we had to hold it, like we literally had to jump on this guy. But anyway, it turned out to be a pretty successful mission. And we get back, and the MEDEVAC guys are like, who are you guys? Like, we got word of it, and all of a sudden we see you guys taking off, and so we kind of made some credibility of who we were and what we can do and what our capabilities were.
But Yogi, sorry, real quick, what's the difference between MEDEVAC and CSAR?
Okay, so Army MEDEVAC, dust off, first and foremost, Geneva Convention, Red Cross, unarmed, right? We have no such restrictions. We have miniguns, 50s, we're an armed entity. Our job, the primary job would be to pick up that downed aviator who shot down behind enemy lines, right? That's the primary job in conjunction with the CSAR task force. And I could bore you. That's, that's with the A-10s and the AWACS and everybody getting involved trying to get, a down pilot out of there. Well, obviously that wasn't happening in Afghanistan, but we saw the scene developing. The Army was crashing a lot of aircraft, right, at night. So the Army command goes, no flying below 25% of loom, right?
Yeah.
So every time something happened.
Did you guys have FLIR?
We had FLIR. So anytime something happened, so we're flying in horrendous weather, and we're making these little, onesie twosie rescues, and people are like, who are these guys? Who are these guys flying around? And they're like, you think you could do it? And we're like, okay, we'll poke our nose in it. We'll see what happens, and we're just by sheer luck. A lot of skill on some of the crews that did it, but we're just doing some shit that's crazy and we're getting away with it. We're still hearing about this Operation Anaconda. So let me get, so all of a sudden Anaconda happens. We were like, we have no role in it. So we're just like watching it and then shit starts going south fast.
Let's tee it up just real quick, Yogi. For those who don't know what Anaconda is, great book is Not a Good Day to Die that covers it pretty extensively. But if you just gave people, here's kind of what was going on at the time and the reason.
So it was this operation to cut off and seize some objectives and basically envelop the Taliban and try to beat them in some sort of decisive battle, Yeah. But again, I think it was planned shitty. To this day, I don't know why there was no arty available. There wasn't really a lot of fires to support those guys. They got inserted into the low ground, and immediately the battle started turning. Yeah, shit.
It was a rough battle for sure. And you got like conventional
and
Army guys.
Of course, we wanted to use the partner forces as a blocking force, and we know how that worked out, right? There was a lot of special operations involved, a lot of SR going on. I got to work with a lot of interesting folks, Aussies, New Zealanders, Danish special forces. People, after the battle, talking to guys who were like watching a mission I was on through binoculars on the side of a mountain, and I'm like, I didn't know you guys were there, so it just went south. The enemy, contrary to popular opinion, does not shy away from a fight. I think we've learned that by now, but these guys do not shy away from a fight. It was still all the foreign fighters, the Chechens, the Arabs, all this. Everybody wanted a piece of the great Satan. So the battle starts to go south. I don't think you liked it as an Apache pilot. Now, I'll tell you why. So at some point they go, hey, would you guys go up to this FARP Texaco, which is east of the Shai-Cote Valley. And it was a FARP setup, and it was pretty big FARP, right? And they go, things are going south. Would you guys go up there just in case? But we don't think we're going to need you, blah, 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 blah. So we go to this FARP, and Apaches are coming in all kinds of shot up.
I know. Yeah.
I'm sitting there looking at these Apaches going, man, if rounds are going to do that to the aircraft, what are they going to do to me? I'm now getting, all butterflies in my stomach. I don't know if this was the right career choice, and I guess initially you guys were using the European, the hover fire, and that wasn't working out too well against, in the valleys with the PKMs and the Dishkas and I mean, they're just coming back shot up, and it was just pretty ugly. As a matter of fact, I think so many Apaches got damaged that the Marine ARG had to send 5 Cobras over to augment, because just the you guys were getting just shot. Nobody got shot down, but aircraft were just getting effed up, and they were all coming back to this FARP, right? And I'm just like, wow, and then started talking to some other PJs. Matter of fact, Jason Cunningham, the guy was killed in Razor 01, Razor 2. We were actually shooting the shit with him there at that FARP. Experienced the earthquake at that FARP. I remember walking towards the aircraft, and you can check this. I remember walking towards my aircraft, and everything's sort of undulating. I'm going, man, I need to drink some water, man. I think I'm dehydrated, right? And all of a sudden I hear earthquake, and I'm like, oh, okay. Cause I was like, and it was crazy. And then the battle's going on all day, and we're hearing specifically about 2 or 3 wounded guys, but nobody can get to them, right? All the aircraft, I mean, they didn't even send the MEDEVAC birds because the fires birds were getting just shot up, right? And all of a sudden it gets dark, and again, this is 20 years ago, so you got to forgive me if I'm a tiny bit fuzzy on it, but it gets dark, and we're spinning up, literally go back to Kandahar, right? Because there's nothing for us. And then all of a sudden they come on the radio, and our call sign was Gecko, and they're like, Gecko, we're wondering if you guys would be willing to give a try to get in this LZ and get these guys out now that it's dark. And so I'm flying co-pilot to flight lead, and I'm like, I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll give it a try. So we shut down, we brief it up, we get a little more detail on it, but pretty much everything we're told is wrong, come to find out later. But we're getting some detail on it, we brief it up. We know it's going to be a hot LZ. We know there's fighting going on. And there's this weird movie moment where my flight lead, Tom Cahill, who got the Silver Star that night, unfortunately he's no longer with us. He literally does one of these, hey guys, if we go and do this, there's a really good chance we're all going to get fucked up. Does anybody have a problem with that, right? And, it's like out of a movie, man. Nobody says anything. A couple of the PJs are like, fuck no, let's just go. And I'm thinking, well, I do kind of have a problem with it, but I can't say anything because everybody, and, but at this point, my mouth is completely dry. My stomach is just in knots. And I'm like, I'm going to end up dead on some mountainside in the middle of Afghanistan. This is some shit, And we go and we brief it up, and the biggest problem we had at that time is, and this is where I give the Army and Marine Corps so much credit, and the Air Force really needs to this day to learn from this. We were on this ridiculously long leash. Like our launch authority was in Saudi Arabia at that time where the CAOC was, right? You're familiar with the CAOC, right? The Combined Air Operations Center, right? That's like the brain for all the air war and theater, right? Yep. And we were on this ridiculously leash, right? Like our boss couldn't launch us. He had to get permission literally from the 1-star, right? And it's just absurd. And it went on for a few years, and it definitely cost some lives, in my opinion. But and I ended up working there for a deployment. And I can tell you, it's a horror show there. But so we get the launch authority, and we have our SATCOM. And the problem is we're passing info back to the CAOC, and then somebody else is passing that same info back to us as new info, and then we're also talking to this JTAC that we think is co-located with the wounded guys, but he's not. He's in some SF talk somewhere, but we don't know any of this, right? Yep. So we're flying through, and then, we're getting reports from this JTAC on what's going on in the LZ, because he's in contact with them via radio. and it's just, 30 to 40 Taliban, small arms and RPG and and we're just like, man, this is crazy. And we're not, it's zero loom, we're navigating. There's all kinds of, you don't know, there's firefights. You don't know who's who, right? And then we get into the valley, and we try to find this LZ. So we go to the first set of coordinates, we land, there's nobody there. People just start blasting at us, and we're like, okay, we got to get out of here, right? And then we're like, tell the guy, goes, well, we'll try these coordinates. So we go to this other LZ, there's some structures, and we can see little fires in them through the goggles and smoke, and now all of a sudden mortars start falling in this LZ, right? So we're like, okay, we got to get out of here, and now we get bingo. And we're like, well, we're not leaving. We're not going to leave without these guys.
So bingo is you're running low on fuel.
Right. So we're like, we're not leaving. We land in another LZ. 3 guys from the 10th Mountain Division jump on the aircraft. We think they're the wounded guys, right? My PJ goes, hey, sir, these guys aren't wounded. I'm like, well, what the fuck do you mean? They're like, sir, these guys think we're exfilling them. I'm like, well, they got to go.
Wow.
And it's like that scene. I mean, look, it's comical now.
Yeah.
But it's like that scene in Apocalypse Now where the Hueys land and that one guy's like, I'm not going. Our PJs had to manhandle these guys out of the aircraft because they didn't want to leave. They thought they were getting exfil. And they've been they're a small unit. They've been in a firefight. They have no clue what's going. They don't have the big picture.
Yep.
So they basically get their asses thrown out of an aircraft back into the war. And we take off, and I can't remember the details of it, but somehow we find the right LZ, right? And the other aircraft had the whole blood because we had just been allowed to push whole blood. The PJs were. So they go into the LZ and they get these guys out. Then we land, we put another one of the wounded guys out, and we get the hell out of there. And we land back at the FARP. I think we calculated we had 8 minutes of gas left, right?
Jesus.
We gas up at the FARP, and then we go back to Bagram to drop these guys off at the hospital. And as we're landing, we hear Razor 01 and Razor 02 taking off, right? And that's the Roberts Ridge guys. Obviously, we don't know this at the time, right? And then we land. We get gas from Bagram and we fly back to Kandahar, and we swap out with the other crew who flies right back up to the FARP again to be ready. Because now that we pull this off, all of a sudden they want us at this FARP.
Yeah,
now.
for sure.
So, we literally hot swap with the other crew, go to bed. The next morning, they wake up, scramble. So, I'm throwing on my stuff. We're going to all of a sudden, we're like, wait, we don't have helicopters. Right. And they come in and they load us on a 130 and send us up there to be ready to relieve the other crew and be able to hopefully go in and get these guys. And my buddy who was flying, who had relieved us and was flying, he says he could see the aircraft. And they were circling around, and he was begging them to let them land and try to get some guys out. And they turned them down because it was, they knew they were a fight, and they were bringing in fires, and it was that big fight. But he, obviously, and we never know, he swears he thinks he could have got in and got a couple of guys out, in and out real quick. And maybe not. We'll never know. And then, what unfolded. And, that was my Anaconda mission. And then I also, to go back, the night previous to that mission, another 2-ship from our unit had a very similar incident, pulled off some guys and under fire and all that. So at the end of that story is it was still early in the war. I'm going to say that what we did that night was done on a daily basis subsequent to that at various points in the war. But there was DFCs and Silver Stars all around just because it was under fire. It was the first time we got everybody out. My boss was a real meat. Both my bosses at the time were very meat eater type guys, and they were like, look, this is no bullshit,
It's not. Yeah.
A couple of years later, I'm at Moody Air Force Base, like, hey, you're getting a DFC. And I was like, oh, okay. What I mean? Awesome. It's like, you're getting a DFC with a V. I mean, but I'm going to say I'm humbled. And yes, it was a very difficult mission, but it wasn't difficult because there was so much shooting and all. It was the fog of war that made it a nightmare.
Yeah.
I could lecture on the fog of war, and that phrase, because I mean, it was just bad info after bad info, and you're left. But the cool thing is, I realized that you can solve problems if you take a breath and sit there and go, okay, this is where we're at. This is what we got. What are the, come up with, let's look at courses of action, discuss it, and try to make it work, But that's what made it difficult, was just the fog of war. It was just bad information, a ridiculous leash that we had all the way back to Saudi Arabia. Bad and we eventually got that. Got away from that, but it was a big battle. And honestly, I don't think we got away from it till we were bitch boys for and when I say that, we were tasked to support the 160th, right? And be their CSAR, which is really silly because they did most of their own CSAR, everything. But we basically followed them around on a lot of hits during a busy time in the war, And I mean, I launched probably 3 or 4 times to go get guys, and they'd already got picked up by 160th assets, But, the advantage of that is we did get a little more autonomous, plus we got under their umbrella, which is a good umbrella.
That's great.
You know what I mean? And we also gained some credibility with them. We went from, not knowing anything, just told to go to these coordinates and wait, to within a year being in their briefs and them having the smart packs and GRGs waiting for us. And our flight leads and pilots going into the briefs, and I made some good friends with a lot of 160th guys. A few guys that I'm still friends with to this day. But I mean, the Air Force is not big on letting junior guys lead. In a MEDEVAC unit, the captain decides if you guys launch.
True.
If there's a MEDEVAC detachment, and they get a call, the captain goes, well, what are the risks? What are this? What are that? How do you guys feel? Okay, go. Well, in the Air Force, they finally got it down to the 05 level. Luckily, on a lot of my deployments, those 05s were aggressive. But I've been on deployments where, I've had guys tell, when I was a rescue guy, tell me, you guys are a bunch of assholes because you didn't launch when we needed you to.
Yeah.
And that's because leadership wasn't because we didn't want to launch. It was because our bosses said, no, we're not doing that, which is a tough pill to swallow, for us. Because, I mean, maybe stupidly so, but I don't remember a time where we didn't go, let's just fucking go and see what we can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And see if we can pull it off.
I think we ended up moving farther up the chain of having to get approvals at a higher level by the time I was in country, like 5 or 6 years later, unfortunately.
Horrible, and it's listen, wars are won by sergeants, privates, and lieutenants. All right. They're not won by, maybe generals on a strategy, but 05s and 06s ain't winning a war. You know what I mean? And so, when you do that, you restrict it. I mean, I got a couple of sad stories. I mean, I remember once, a 860 went down up by Mosul, and they knew there were guys alive, and the regiment, the 101st guys begging us to launch. And we're trying. And we just couldn't get permission to launch by the time we got up there. Unfortunately, the guys had died who were, certainly the PJs and, our medical folks, though, probably if we got up there sooner, we might have been able to save them. So that's tough. It's real tough.
I will say I don't want to take up your whole day here, Yogi. I want to ask just a couple of these questions that I ask of everyone, and then we can wrap up here. But I'm curious, is there something you carried with you into combat, like on each flight or into a deployment?
No, I listen to you when you ask that question because I do, man. I'm a fan of your podcast. I'm not just saying that. So I listen, and I don't. What I did was I did everything the same way. I got in that routine. I didn't like to. I would get uncomfortable if my prep or my gear wasn't set up the way I wanted it, and my vest had to be set up the same way. Kind of like when I played football in college, it's you wear the same, you want your equipment. It's the same thing. Like I had to do shit the same way.
That's that attention to detail I was talking about.
If that routine got changed, I would be nervous. I would be like, I don't like this. You know what I mean? And so that was the only thing, but I didn't have like a good luck charm or anything. I didn't carry pictures of my family or anything because my thing was if I ever got captured, I didn't want them using that against me.
That.
You know what I mean? But I was just just like my shit had, for lack of a better term, my shit had to be the same way.
Squared away. And then, so you already know my other question, and we already talked about it beforehand.
You don't have to ask it in a heartbeat.
Do it all again, huh? You and I would go back now.
If I could I don't miss the military at all anymore. You know what I mean? Because I don't miss the bullshit. When I go on I've worked as a contractor in a unit and I don't miss this, and you're seeing guys do shit. You want to be a major and square them away, but you can't because you're a contractor. And so I don't miss any of that. I miss the people and I miss the mission. Yeah. And I miss that sense of doing something that means something. You know what I mean? I mean, it's, killing bad guys is fine. I have no issue with that. But being able to save people and know that there's some people walking around now because of the efforts you and your crews made, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
That's really
having a number of saves, having a tangible number of guys that I know that, I mean, it's cliche and kind of, silly, but, who knows? Maybe some guy saved will be president or cure cancer, be the next Elon Musk. I don't know.
Well, for sure, they probably have a family now.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. Save, being able to do that and knowing the kind of people, I think the best thing, I think everybody says, it's just the people, man. It's just, the kind of people I got to serve with were just the best people in the world. And I've said this 100 times. My military service was a gift. I consider it a gift. The cliche honor and a privilege, 100%.
Yeah.
Gift for me to do this for almost 30 years. I'm worked hard at trying to move on to other things and not live in the past. I had some transition issues, I'm not going to lie, and caused some pretty bad behaviors and pretty much wrecked the marriage and did some things. I've hopefully gotten better at trying to move on and I look to the future, not the past, but it was a gift, man. It was a gift. It was everything I wanted it to be and more, and even more of a gift to be able to serve my country in difficult times. And, I'm one of those weird guys. I enjoy being downrange. I enjoyed flying. I enjoyed flying in combat, again, we talked about it earlier. I mean, I'm in awe of these guys who go out and get gunfights every night. And it's like, some of it, like, yeah, it was cool. It was fun. And I was scared a lot of the time, but I still kind of liked it. You know what I mean? It's just going out there. I mean, I remember once we're like, let's go see if these guys will shoot at us so we can fuck them up. I mean, that's a crazy thing now, 20 years later. That was what we were thinking. I remember an Apache guy was coming back to Balad and we're coming back in and he crossed and he just took a couple of shots at him. And we called him on the radio and said, hey man, these guys just shot at you. He's like, God damn it. I don't have any gas and I'm Winchester. Yeah. He goes, where were, and I'm like, dude, they'll be gone, but he goes, I was a FARP. And I'm like, he was so pissed, on the radio, he was just so mad because, and then, like I said, one time we saw a couple of tracers and we're like, let's go see if they'll shoot at us. And then we could, the mindset of that now seems crazy as a grandfather and, but that's how you were back then, you know, and it was the greatest time of my, so yeah, taking a long way of saying in an absolute heartbeat. As long as it takes me to pack my shit.
Yeah.
As long as it would take me to make that decision.
Damn it. All right. I love it. Let's end on that, Yogi. Thank you very much for the time, the stories. This has been fantastic. I could talk to you for hours, man.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
it.
I enjoyed it. I really like a chance, I'm serious, to talk to you and hear about some of your experiences, both on the flying side and in your later job, because, yeah, I just love that kind of stuff. So, you know, let's stay in touch. But thank you very much for the opportunity to tell my story. You know, just appreciate it, man. It was fun.
You got it. I hope you enjoyed this combat story. People often write to me with incredible stories and suggestions for interviews. If you want to share a combat story of your own or from someone you served with, record yourself for up to 5 minutes and email it to ryan@combatstory.com. I'll select some of these stories and feature them at the end of our episodes. Thanks for listening. Stay safe.